you lot, I've got to say, overwhelmingly in, an opposition to HS2. None of you like it. I've had a message from Fat Dave. He said, you are joking. HS2 isn't for Leeds folk to be better able to reach London. It's for London PLC to be better able to ransack Leeds of talent. And Fat Dave is reflecting what I'm hearing this morning. None of you seem to be in support of HS2. Is anyone out there up for it? Do any of you like the idea of this high-speed rail link between Leeds and London? Now, someone who is definitely in support of it is Councillor James Lewis, the chair of West Yorkshire Metro. How do you feel when you hear people saying, don't want it, stupid idea, waste of money?
I think it shows that the government haven't made the case properly for HS2 so far. And I think Sir David Higgins' report today is a big step in the right direction.
We've all seen this stuff recently. You saw the documentary by Evan Davis about how London's sucking everything in. And there just seems to be this, frankly, political campaign to keep saying, London's brilliant, we need to make it easier for people to get to London. They interviewed someone who goes from Manchester. He commutes to his office in Soho in London because that's where everybody is. Are you being a bit disingenuous to say that actually we might use it to get to Birmingham and other parts of the country? Or is it all just about sucking things into London?
No, not at all. I don't think it's disingenuous. I think it's underlying what we think is the right approach to take to HS2. I don't necessarily agree with the argument that it's just about getting people to London. Important as that is, I think there's other journeys and there's other improvements we need to make to the transport network.
I have to say, this morning I have had nothing but negative comments. I will always put both sides of the argument forward, but I think there's someone who can put it forward even better than me. That's Jo Mason. She's a parish councillor in Church Fenton. Jo, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello there. James is listening to you, and I understand you don't necessarily agree with what he's saying, Jo.
No, I haven't heard everything he's said just now, but what I have heard, I haven't agreed with at all. I think, firstly, his premise that, the reason that every poll shows the people of this country do not want HS2. The businesses of Leeds, the businesses of Bradford, they've all been polled, they don't want HS2. And he's saying it's just that we haven't sold, the government hasn't sold it well enough. Well, they've actually spent £1 billion to press on PR and consultants. So if they've spent £1 billion and they still haven't sold it, today we're witnessing their 7th relaunch. Mm-hmm. How much selling does he think this needs?
It's a lot of money, James, isn't it? They've spent £1 billion just on PR. That's an awful lot of money to still have you on the show convincing people.
Like I say, I don't think the government have necessarily got the scheme on track in the first instance. But if we're saying that in Yorkshire we don't want infrastructure investment to happen when it's happening elsewhere, I think that is lax ambition on behalf of Yorkshire.
That's not what I'm saying, though. We do want infrastructure to happen in Yorkshire. We desperately need infrastructure to happen in Yorkshire. What we don't need is HS2.
Why not?
Jo,
if you're in favour of infrastructure, if you're in favour of investing, why not HS2?
Because HS2 doesn't solve any of the problems that we face. It doesn't solve the connectivity problems. It goes to a very few places. Even then, some of those places are just out-of-town stations. It doesn't solve any of the connectivity problems across the north. You were just talking about Leeds to Manchester. HS2 would do absolutely nothing for Leeds to Manchester. In fact, if HS2 goes ahead, what we will lose are services. We will lose services. If you get the commuter trains on a morning from York into Leeds, they're very busy trains. HS2 would take 2 of those lines north of Church Fenton into York. We would lose commuter services. It's commuter services that we need. Intercity, the demand for intercity travel has actually plateaued. It is no longer increasing, and that will probably fall in the coming years as improvements in technology, IT.
You mean because people will start working at home and stop commuting?
We've got problems with energy. Why do we want to be encouraging people, predominantly business people, to travel from the north to London to a business
Well,
meeting?
let me ask James that. Joe's question is why are we encouraging this? Surely this actually, what we should be encouraging is things like we should be applying money into technology so we don't need to go down to London to have a meeting.
It's absolutely fascinating that as more and more people have used the internet and email, more and more people are using the railways. One going up, an improvement in technology and information technology doesn't necessarily mean there's less a demand for travel. We're going to be facing a situation where in 10, 15 years' time, and that's the amount of time it needs to take to plan infrastructure. We're going to be full of bottlenecks on the railway and bottlenecks on the road. We've got to plan that distance in the future. I agree with some of the points Joe's making. I think HS2, we've never said in Leeds we just want to be passive recipients of a scheme handed down from London. And I think things like about how does it better connect other areas, not just the ones with stations, is really, really important. I also think, if I commute in on the train, I commute on exactly the line Joe was talking about from Garforth Station. And she's absolutely right, the trains are full up. And the track's also full up. We need extra track, we need extra capacity. And that's what HS2 provides.
It won't. What you're saying is absolutely not true. What HS2 will do is remove the capacity on that very line you're talking about. At the moment, there are 4 tracks going into York.
Joe, sorry, I have to ask, what makes you say that? Why will it remove capacity?
Because what they do, when they join at Church Fenton, they stop building new high-speed track, and it joins the classic track. It becomes what they call classic compatible train.
It sounds like a bottleneck to me, then.
It's a bottleneck. Right. So what they're going to do is they're going to take 2 of those 4 tracks and make them HS2 dedicated. So all the commuter traffic, all the classic intercity, and all the freight traffic will be forced from 4 tracks onto 2. And this problem is repeated all over the country, which is why HS2 is a disaster for capacity on commuter trains, which is where the bulk of rail journeys take place, and it's also a disaster for connectivity. It doesn't provide the connectivity that people are asking for, particularly in the north of England.
Joe, can I ask you, right, you're a parish councillor. Are you speaking as a concerned resident? What? You're speaking very passionately against HS2. What position are you coming from?
Well, I'm a coordinator of our local action group.
Right.
Church Fenton Says No to HS2, and I'm also the chair of our local parish council. We've got involved with this, like a lot of people, because it was coming to Church Fenton, or the initial proposal.
Okay, so it's having a very direct impact on Joe's life, James.
It has a direct impact, and that is why I've taken an interest, and that's why I've become knowledgeable about this subject. The vast majority of people don't really realise what's going on. There is a huge amount of secrecy and misinformation.
But James, here's my question. Jo clearly is angry about this. She doesn't want HS2. She's got involved in an action group. Is it $1 billion? A lot of money's been spent on the PR. You're here having to make the case again. Does it not worry you that people are still completely unconvinced by this?
I think, first of all, in terms of those areas that are affected by the line, including the area I'm actually a councillor for, HS2 company need to get the route right, and they need to get the actual impact they're having on local people. They need to do the job properly there. It's a long time before they're going to start work on the line, and they need to make sure the route is right, and they're trying to minimise problems. And I don't think they've got the details of the route right. But that doesn't mean I disagree with the strategic objectives of HS2. And in terms of capacity, when I'm standing waiting for my commuter train at Garforth Station, the reason you can't put more commuter trains down that line is there's one track in each direction, and all the express trains are coming down that track as well, whizzing through Garforth Station, not stopping.
Exactly.
So by taking those trains onto HS2, the cross-country services and the Transpennine services that will be able to use HS2 will be able to put more commuter trains down there. The alternative, when we talk about impacts on communities, like I say, there's 2 lines through Garforth and Micklefield, 1 in each direction. Yep. If you were to expand that to 4 lines in each direction, it would have a much greater impact on those communities.
Hang on,
those are the alternatives.
I'm going to cut you both off. No, we can't all talk over each other. I want to ask you about whether or not HS2 will increase the line that you just discussed to 4, or will it stay at 2?
What it'll do is to put extra tracks through the countryside, so you're not having to demolish a sway through existing communities, which you'd have to do to expand the existing railway.
That has to make you happy, Joe?
No, I'm not happy with that. That's absolutely not true. In order to increase the capacity on the East Coast Main Line, you would not have to do another 2 tracks the whole length of it. And he knows that that's not true. What you could do is you can remove
I'm talking about the commuter line you're talking about a different line now, Joe.
Excuse me, it's my turn. You can remove pinch points by putting sort of small stretches of extra track, almost like overtaking lanes that you can put on. It is absolutely not necessary to put new tracks the whole length of the East Coast Main Line. What he's saying isn't true. You can put more carriages on, you can reduce the number of first-class carriages, you can lengthen platforms to have longer trains. There are many, many, many ways of getting the capacity we need where we need it, and HS2 is not it.
OK, Joe, let me ask you this. I've heard this morning from a lot of people who absolutely agree with you. I'm going to put very quickly, I'd like you to answer one point that I've had simply because someone's put it to me on Twitter. You're being called a NIMBY. I'll let you answer that in a sec. But here's the thing. We need to have progression. London is leaving us us behind. London is sucking everything from the north. Manchester is expanding at a rate of knots. We need something that's going to help us not be left behind. Why are you so against something that might well be the answer to us perhaps possibly being left behind?
Right. Well, first of all, it's definitely not the answer. And the evidence from all over Europe tells you that when you connect other cities to the principal city, the net effect is that the economy is dragged into the principal city. And the more primacy, the bigger that principal city has, the bigger that effect. In the UK, the effect would be dramatic. It would benefit London at the expense of the regions. We're being sold a pup. And the councillors in the north, who seem to be the only ones who are in favour of it, need to open their eyes and wake up. Not all the councils. There are lots of councils that can see it for what it is and are opposed to it. But Leeds City Council in particular, they need to open their eyes and wake up. We are being sold a pup. This would benefit London and London only. The only people pushing this are politicians and the ones with vested interests, the big companies who have their snouts in the trough.
Right, hang on, Joe. We are balancing on the precipice there. I don't want to be defaming anybody. James, I'm not clearly going to accuse you of having the snout in the trough. However, as a politician, are you in hock to London? Is that what this is about?
Absolutely not. If people are concerned that, transport links to London affect the north, I'm surprised they're not out picketing the M1 to stop traffic coming up and down on there. We know
the M1 isn't a single line between 2 points. You're making this really spurious analogy with motorways. HS2 bears no relation to the motorway.
Hang on, Joe. HS2 isn't just going to go from Leeds to London, though, is it? Or Manchester to London. It will stop off along the way as well.
If you were to get on it in Leeds, you have the choice of outside, somewhere near Meadowhall, because everybody's really into going to Meadowhall, somewhere outside Nottingham, Birmingham. There you three.
Right, okay.
Do you call that connectivity? It isn't connectivity at all.
But it's like veins, isn't it? Am I right in thinking that, James? It's about the commuter lines coming into those hubs, if you like.
The existing high-speed line we have in England, which runs from London through Kent to the continent, actually not only supports trains running from London to Paris, it also supports lots of local trains from Kent into London. It doesn't just have to be about the trains that run just on that line.
And
that's why I used examples... Sorry, Joe, it's my turn now. That's why I used examples of motorways. We didn't build a motorway network with just one junction in Leeds and one junction in London. And that's what I've said all along about HS2. I don't think it's 100% right. We need to get those links on so it can be used for trains that don't just stop at HS2 stations, can supply other cities. And as you said yourself, we need extra capacity on the railways. And I think this is one of the best ways of providing it. But we need to get those other links right.
But those other links are not in the budget. They're not provided for. There's nothing in the legislation for them.
But isn't the argument therefore, Joe? Hang on, Joe.
Fantasy here.
Yeah, but isn't therefore the argument is we just leave things as they are because we might not have extra investment? Surely once we get HS2, it'll bring money in. It means we can build those extra commuter links.
Why would it bring money in?
Well, people will be moving up and down the country. People want to invest in the country.
People already move up and down the country. And also, it's how many people... Councillor Lewis has mentioned HS1. HS1 has not yet even got a third of the passenger numbers that were predicted for it. The passenger forecasts for HS2 are absolutely pie in the sky, which means that everybody in this country will be facing an ongoing massive subsidy bill to keep this train running. Everybody in the country will be subsidising it for the benefit of the wealthy few.
Clearly, we're not going to come to any kind of agreement here, are we? It's a really interesting debate, and I'm really glad you did join us, Joe, this morning. Clearly, you've not been convinced, and I'm sure you'll keep up your good fight, James. I'm sure you'll keep wanting to convince people. I am hearing Vicky Bentley, 100% waste of money. Ian Kirk, absolute waste of money and time making people's lives a misery. David Seacroft says yes, if it generates employment. And final message to Fat Davey says, we need this, we need that. Who's this we? Hands up all you we folk, not the cheerleaders, not the people. Who are you all? Are you speaking for all of us?
Do you know, there's something interesting. The Bradford Chamber of Commerce, which somebody referred to earlier, they've said two things. They've said they don't want HS2, but the biggest issue for Bradford is about how it's connected to the rest of the country. I think if HS2 is to provide value for money, and like I've said, we're not 100% in favour of the scheme as it stands, it's got to answer that question. How are places like Bradford better connected to the country? It's got to be part of a bigger plan, and it's got to connect the whole of Yorkshire, just not one or two places.
It needs to be part of a bigger plan. They need to scrap HS2, they need to go back to the drawing board, and they need to make a proper integrated transport policy for the whole of the country. Not come up with a harebrained vanity project and then try and make it fit by superimposing it on top of everything else. We need a proper integrated transport policy that looks at transport across the country, right down to your cycle path, and then we can start spending the money on something that will actually benefit this country, and HS2 is not it.
Well, there we go. I think that sums up everybody beautifully.